Citizen Sleeper is the second and latest game from Jump Over the Age, the one-person studio founded by Gareth Damian Martin. I already did a video on their first game, In Other Waters, and I was excited to learn that Jump Over the Age was coming out with a new one, so I figured it was only natural to review their next game. Overall, I've enjoyed the experience. Let's start with the premise. In the far future, you are a sleeper that has found himself, or whatever gender you want to call yourself here, aboard a space station called Erlin's Eye, a station which already has its own sordid history and strife throughout the years. And what is a sleeper? Well, a human will sign a contract with one of the conglomerates that make sleepers, in your case, S&ARP. They have their memories copied and put into a robotic sleeper to perform hard labor. The catch is that the human is put into cryogenic sleep until the sleeper has died or done their duty, and that they are creating this android with human memories that is essentially its own person. External stimuli has its differences in a sleeper, but the existential dread and overall pain of living in a brutish environment is still there. Eventually, your character gets tired of it and escapes, which is how they end up here on the station. Unfortunately, a sleeper is still corporate property, and they have a planned obsolescence built into their bodies in the form of a stabilizer that they must take every so often. Furthermore, escaped sleepers are basically escaped slaves, and some people aboard the station will have an air of mistrust around you. You know, one of my criticisms of In Other Waters was the unrealistic and over-optimistic nature of how corporate misbehavior would be treated in that universe. I certainly don't have the same reservations in this universe here. It perfectly captures the almost perfunctory malice towards human life that powerful entities like large corporations express on a daily basis, treating all people, places, and things like easily disposable tools. And anybody who's experienced enough of our late-stage capitalism in present day should understand that this kind of dystopia isn't pessimistic, but very much a realistic future. Anyway, back to the story. You're immediately put to work by the helpful scrapper that found your pod and turned your systems back on. The bad news is it's been months since your escape, and you're not in very good shape. That whole planned obsolescence is kicking in, and you have to find a source of stabilizer fast. It's around this point of the game where it introduces the dice mechanics. Almost all places have actions that require dice to use. A 6 can be used anywhere for a 100% positive outcome, and a 1 would only give you a 50-50 split between a neutral or negative outcome. Your skills can increase these dice outputs, so that you can have multiple paths and different skills towards the same goal. Also, there's a form of hacking in the game, and most of these actions actually use low dice rolls. So your low dice could be spent there instead of risking a bad outcome elsewhere. Each action also comes with a risk level to tell you what kind of punishment a negative outcome could give you. A risky action could take away your energy, but dangerous actions could even hurt your health. You can get a perk to tell you more specific outcomes, but that only comes near mid-game. It's a simple system, but it's challenging enough to make you question your decision-making in terms of where you put your dice, especially early game. You want to plan out what you want to do that cycle and keep track of your energy and condition needs. There's also actions that require cryo, the form of money in this game, or other items you find or buy in various areas. Throughout the game, you're either working towards a goal or bartering your way into that goal, which could be helping people out, trying to manage your own daily needs, or opening up new areas. What's good about this game? Well, the story, of course. If this game is about anything, it's about telling a good story. Most people on Erlin's Eye are struggling to stay alive almost as much as you are. Life is hard here. Crime and skirting around the law are commonplace, if you can even call it law, when the governing body is just another corporate entity trying to hold together a crumbling hand-me-down of a space station. All this is good in a way, because you're already a criminal in the eyes of the corporation that wants you back, and some people are sympathetic to your plight. They might even understand the kind of desperation it took to be in your position. Such a future doesn't exactly have good endings, where you conquer all of your challenges. I mean, in the endgame, you can survive well enough to sustain yourself, but life shouldn't always be about yourself. It's about helping others, and some of those challenges to help others come with mixed outcomes. Sometimes you help somebody's future become a little brighter, and sometimes you don't come back, at least not the same person you were when you started. With all great story-based games comes a great soundtrack, and this one by Amos Roddy is no exception. While I really like his In Other Waters soundtrack just slightly more, I really can't argue how consistently good all 23 songs are in this soundtrack. It's one of the main things I was looking forward to when playing this game, and I certainly wasn't disappointed. I do have a few nitpicks though, and I do mean nitpicks. I don't want to detract how good this game is, but I do feel like I should point out a few details I noticed. One thing I noticed right away, and this is coming from just playing Disco Elysium right before this game, is that there's no voice acting. I think one of Disco's biggest strengths came from the gravity of its voice acting, different personas competing for attention in the protag's head.
An inordinate amount of time passes. It is utterly void of struggle. No ex-wives are contained within it. You wouldn't like it if I told you what was back there.
It's just a little hangover-induced photosensitivity. With all the synapses you've extinguished, it's a miracle you can even think this sentence. A fine web of scarring covers the back of your right hand, but none of it is recent. Abort. You clearly have not thought this through. This sounds like something you can use to call this Sylvie later. No one is saying the multi-pattern necktie you found tied to the ceiling fan can talk.
Let's bail! Time to push the eject button! Sounds like a responsibility! You don't like those!
If an assault were launched on this building right now, if the windows came crashing down and the whole world descended upon you, this man would hurl himself in death's way to save you. You are sure of this, but why?
The voice acting really forced me to pay attention to the dialogue. There were moments in Citizen Sleeper where I was just kind of passively reading the story presented to me, without digesting it as well as I should have. Now, on the flip side, I'm definitely not going to underestimate the kind of budget required to implement this sort of thing. I mean, there are indie budgets, and then there are truly indie budgets. For example, here's the entire voice acting credit list for Disco Elysium. I would not be surprised if we're talking, $100,000 US just for the voice acting. I don't know, I'm not in the industry, but I'm just saying I understand if a quote-unquote one-person studio couldn't afford that kind of commitment. And I know I just talked about how good the soundtrack was, but I noticed that none of the songs were localized. For example, in most games, you wander in a new area and the music changes. It helps tie the song together with the area, like this is its soundtrack, and the music gives off a certain mood to reflect how it feels to be in that area. In Citizen Sleeper, most of the soundtrack is just playing in the background. There's no association with how this area ties into a certain mood, which I think is an important interaction between a player playing the game and listening to its music. Though I strongly suspect this was planned because of the amount of moving around you do in this game. It's not uncommon to go from one end of the station to the other to plan out where you want to put your dice, and having the soundtrack change so frequently would be a jarring experience. But it does mean I tend to remember the songs less because they aren't tied to a moment of discovery or change. Most of the perks are pretty good, but I found Endure as a skill to be the worst one by far. Photosynthetic Skin sounds like a great perk on paper, but dice are so valuable that you would rather spend cryo on energy than a low-end dice just to get a single unit of energy. Hard to kill is even worse because you should never ever be in such a bad condition in the first place. I'm typically using Stabilizer just before I hit 3 dice, or if I'm playing an engineer build with that awesome self-repair skill, I'm just constantly topping off my condition each cycle. Sadly, one of the builds specializes in Endure. I'd rather just have one that's more of a people person, attuned to engage, which unfortunately isn't an option. Overall, the initial build type doesn't matter too much because you can make it what you want it by the mid-game. So again, this is just a nitpick. I do have one actual complaint though. I really started to notice that the dialogue in this game falls into this fatalistic trap where none of the options you pick really matter. There are relatively few exceptions to this, but in most cases, you pick an option, the character you're talking to responds to that choice with a sentence or two, and then the main plot just continues along the way, many times within the same paragraph. Your choice really didn't matter except to flavor the dialogue just slightly. And this is a complaint I will levy towards Disco Elysium as well. Overall, none of the decisions you make will actually change the main plot, and this discovery made me kind of annoyed that I couldn't, say, solve this murder sooner than expected with the right options in a second playthrough. However, unlike Citizen Sleeper, the decisions in Disco Elysium were still important to the character himself. There were different paths to achieve the same goal, and some of the dialogue trees were high risk enough to cause emotionally embarrassing situations, or permanently impact how a character treated you for the rest of the game. You really didn't want to fail some of those roles because you felt bad for the shit you just brought down on him, and now each part of his psyche is going to narrate how much of a brainless idiot you are for even attempting that decision in the first place.
Again? Seriously? You could have died there. Shit. I'm failing you. This wasn't part of our deal. The words have already left your mouth. One moment you're running like the wind. Then you've suddenly turned around and are giving him the finger, furiously, with both hands. Why?
If it comes off like that, it's because it is. And you are.
Seriously, you need to go play Disco Elysium if you haven't already. One area that seemed to be fleshed out pretty well in this game, and had much less of a fatalistic slant, were the different directions you can go with Lim and Mina. They are trying to get a ticket to a new colonization ship, kind of similar to the Nauvoo colony ship from The Expanse. There are a total of 4 different endings with them, and you can't just complete all of them in a single playthrough. This included one of the most soul-crushing endings of all. I just wish there was a bit more development with the other pathways this game offered. But I have to concede that there's already hours of dialogue in this game, so I guess I can't complain much. If you decide to play this game, here's a few tips to get you started. First, prioritize opening every area that you can. You can't know the best action to place your dice if all of the areas aren't available to you. In fact, as soon as you start the game, you're already in need of a doctor, and they aren't immediately visible. So, to proceed, you need to run through some of the wheel challenges in other areas to reveal new locations. Sometimes it's not immediately apparent that it will open up something, so just try it and find out, especially early game. Next, specialize your character. This isn't the kind of game where you should make a jack of all trades. Figure out what you want your character to be good at, especially at the character selection screen, and hone in on that. In most cases, you have multiple paths for the same goal, and you should pick the path that most aligns with your character. Getting a character all the way up to 2 in a skill is rewarding, and can guarantee positive outcomes in many situations. Having said that, the 1-point upgrades are still cheap fixes to fill out the weaknesses in your build. Even in the early game, it's worth putting a point into your worst skill to get rid of a -1, especially if it's hindering your progress. And in the mid-game, pushing those minor skills to +1 isn't that much of an upgrade commitment, and pay dividends in those cases where you just have one option left to proceed. By the time you reach the DLC area, the game really expects you to have at least a passing proficiency in every skill and ways of acquiring resources in a short amount of time. As long as you aren't trying to specialize in more than 2 skills, you should have enough points to get there. Also, dice are the most important resource in this game, so don't waste them. If you have +2 in a skill, don't put a 6 on an action unless you really need it. Put a 4 in there to guarantee a positive outcome, and save those 6s for your weaker skills. Don't try to use low dice for risky actions either. The data cloud actually has some data mining activities that usually require low dice rolls, so those are perfect for getting rid of those and gaining useful resources. In a pinch, there are also safe actions, like jobs for earning money, or a certain spot in the garden area that will give you risk-free energy. Finally, don't sell anything unless you really need the cash. You need just about every resource in the game, even when you think you don't. Everything from scrap to ship mine fragments, to data, to mushrooms, will be used elsewhere. And until you hit late game and know just about everything there is to know, there's no reason to sell anything. Even in the early game, there are plenty of places to work where you can earn some crypto, and as long as you're planning out those large purchases, like Stabilizer, you should be able to get the cash you need without getting desperate. Overall, how do I feel about this game? Is this the sci-fi version of Disco Elysium, as some might claim? No, not exactly. Is it a bit unfair to keep comparing this to Disco Elysium? In many ways, yes. Disco Elysium was a fluke in the game industry. A product of decades of world building, a failed book project, an alcoholic depression by the author, and finally, an ambitious video game project with a budget to match. But its mark on the history of gaming has given us some wonderful games, and revitalized this kind of story-centric, gameplay-like genre, the walking simulator, if you will. And despite any nitpicks I've said about it, Citizen Sleeper is one of the best examples. It's worth your time and money to explore this game. The DLC chapters are free, and continue the story for people who have already played most of the base game. It's definitely the kind of generosity you don't find in the gaming industry nowadays. And of course, I look forward to the next project Jump Over the Age comes up with. I think with how things have progressed, the studio has a promising future.